So I want you to picture a massive, failing multinational corporation.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So the stock is just plummeting. I mean, the employees are in open revolt, and the infrastructure of this company is literally burning to the ground.
Wow. Absolute chaos, basically.
Exactly. Total disaster. Now, you would expect the CEO of this company to be, I don't know, down on the factory floor, right? Or locked in a boardroom, hammering out some kind of desperate survival strategy with the board.
Yeah, you'd want them right in the thick of it,
Yeah.
managing the crisis.
Well, instead, this CEO has flown to an entirely different continent, and they are currently pitching their grand turnaround strategy to a local neighborhood book club.
Wait, a book club?
A book club. A group of people who have absolutely no stake in the company, they own no shares, they have literally zero power to change the supply chain or fix the issues.
I mean, that is just a completely absurd image. It makes no
It
sense.
doesn't.
Huh.
But when you look at the mechanics of modern geopolitical opposition, it's actually exactly what is happening on the global stage right now.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. It is the ultimate strategic misallocation of resources.
Totally.
You have these prominent leaders trying to engineer a massive domestic revolution, but they're seeking validation from entirely disconnected foreign observers.
Right, and that profound, highly localized frustration is the starting point for our deep dive today.
And it is quite a deep dive.
Oh, it really is. We are dissecting a highly specific, passionately written, and frankly explosive source text today. It's a blog post dated April 15th, 2026.
And the title alone really sets the tone.
Yeah, the title is fucking Reza. It was published on a site called Face, and it's authored by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
That's right. And right at the top of his site, he identifies himself prominently. He points out that he was Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Which is such an interesting detail to include, right?
It's vital. That background, that boots-on-the-ground political organizing in a huge American metropolis, it's a critical lens for understanding him.
Yeah, how he views this sweeping, volatile landscape of the 2026 Iran war.
Exactly. He is taking the mechanics of neighborhood canvassing, like door-to-door retail politics, and trying to apply them to a Middle Eastern conflict.
A conflict that involves artificial intelligence, massive corporate armies, and global superpowers. It's wild.
It is. It's a massive leap in scale, but the foundational logic he uses is fascinating.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to really deconstruct this single snapshot of commentary.
We're going to examine the author's incredibly unconventional theories, things like how modern warfare actually operates on the ground.
Right, and why traditional economic sanctions just seem to bounce right off the adversary in this specific case.
And there's also a truly unsettling theory he has about American capitalism.
Oh man, the YouTube algorithms part, where he argues that our tech is accidentally acting as a massive morale booster for foreign regimes.
Yeah, that part is a real paradigm shift.
Okay, let's unpack this. But before we jump into the deep end, we need to set some ground rules.
Yes, absolutely. We need to be very clear with you, the listener, right up front.
Because the source material we are pulling apart today is heavily, heavily politically charged.
Very much so. The author names names. He pulls zero punches whatsoever.
He discusses figures like Donald Trump, John Bolton, Reza Pahlavi, the Ayatollah, and various global regimes with just absolute uncompromising bluntness.
And we need to make it crystal clear that we are impartially reporting the author's views to you.
Right. We are not endorsing any political stance here, left or right. We don't take sides on this show.
We're simply exploring the architecture of the ideas presented in the text, because the underlying mechanisms he describes about information flow and military structure are genuinely fascinating.
Regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, the mechanics he outlines are worth exploring.
Exactly.
Okay, so to understand the author's grand strategy for untangling the situation in Iran, we have to start at the inciting incident.
The spark that set the whole blog post off.
Yeah, the moment that clearly drove him to just sit down at his computer and start typing furiously.
He writes about watching Reza Pahlavi, who is a highly prominent figure in the Iranian opposition.
Right, the former crown prince. And the author watches him giving an address.
But he points out that it wasn't a massive rally in Tehran. It wasn't even a huge gathering of the diaspora in Los Angeles or London.
No, the author specifically describes watching Reza address, quote, 20 white people in a small room in Sweden.
What's fascinating here is how the author uses that specific visual to highlight a fatal flaw in traditional exiled leadership.
It goes back to that CEO at the book club analogy.
Exactly. Historically, exiled leaders operate on this fundamental assumption. They think, well, if I can convince Western powers that my cause is righteous, those powers will step in.
They think the international observers will utilize their leverage to force change back in the home country.
Right. So they do the circuit, they speak at European think tanks, they meet with foreign dignitaries, they present their case to the international community.
They wear the nice suits and shake the right hands. But the author looks at that exact model and essentially calls it a complete delusion.
He really does. He writes, this dude has no clue. The white people in Sweden can't do shit for you.
Which is so blunt, especially if there are only 20 of them. He just eviscerates the strategy.
And then he points out the sheer brutal geography of the situation. I mean, Iran is half the size of the United States.
It's massive. It is a sprawling, complex nation.
And you simply cannot project power or inspire a domestic revolution across a landmass that large by talking to a handful of polite observers thousands of miles away in Scandinavia.
It's mathematically and culturally impossible.
It reveals a profound psychological disconnect. When leadership is exiled for decades, their daily reality becomes completely untethered from the people they claim to lead.
That makes total sense. They become highly fluent in the language of international diplomacy, right? But they lose the vocabulary of actual domestic mobilization.
Yes. They forget how to talk to the person on the street. So the author is demanding a pivot here.
He states, if Reza starts talking to Iranians instead of white people, maybe this will come to be.
He is pointing out that the target audience for a revolution in 2026 cannot be the international observer.
It has to be the citizen on the ground.
Always.
And here is the really terrifying part. While the opposition is wasting time pitching this metaphorical book club in Sweden, the Iranian regime is looking at the global chessboard and feeling incredibly confident.
Oh, they are projecting absolute certainty.
The author notes that during the, what he called the Islamabad talks, the Iranian demands were utterly maximalist.
Meaning they weren't actually negotiating, they were just dictating terms.
Exactly, because they genuinely believed they were winning the war. Now, the obvious question is, why do they think they're winning?
Well, the immediate assumption most people make is internal propaganda. We just assume authoritarian regimes brainwash their populace and their own leadership with state-run media.
Right, creating this massive echo chamber where they literally never lose a battle on TV.
But the author completely flips that assumption on its head. He says they aren't brainwashed by their own propaganda at all.
This blew my mind. He explicitly states that the regime's confidence comes from watching American talking heads on YouTube.
It's incredible. He specifically mentions blue eyes, blonde hair, men arguing that the U.S. is actively losing the war.
So it's not state TV, it's literally American YouTubers.
This raises an important question, right? That's at a critical evolution in the concept of information warfare.
How so?
Think about what happens when an adversary's morale is being fueled not by their own fabrications, but by your country's own digital ecosystem.
Right, because if an Iranian state media anchor claims America is collapsing, the regime negotiators know it's a fabricated talking point. They wrote the script.
Exactly. But if they open YouTube and see an American commentator broadcasting from within the United States, screaming that American foreign policy is a catastrophic failure.
And that the war is lost. I mean, that carries massive unearned credibility for them.
It validates their deepest hopes. The author even asks, who do you believe if not Americans talking about America?
It's such a sharp point. And this isn't just about random fringe YouTubers with a webcam in their basement.
No, not at all.
The author takes aim at the highest levels of the American geopolitical establishment. He specifically calls out John Bolton.
Yes, the former national security advisor.
Right. And he notes that Bolton argued for an attack on Iran his entire adult life. But now that there is actually an attack on Iran in this 2026 scenario, he is suddenly anti-Trump.
And the author's explanation for this pivot is just pure, unfiltered economic cynicism.
Oh, it's brutal. He writes, because being pro-Trump does not sell books. He wrote a book, Welcome to Capitalism.
We really need to analyze the underlying assertion there. He's arguing that in the modern digital and publishing landscape, geopolitical strategy has been completely subordinated to the attention economy.
I have to say, I really struggle with that specific premise.
You don't buy it.
It just feels overly reductive. To say that John Bolton, a man whose entire multi-decade career, his identity, and his political ideology has been defined by extreme hawkish interventionism.
Right, he is the ultimate hawk.
Exactly. To say he would completely abandon his core geopolitical worldview simply to move units at Barnes & Noble People with that level of ideological entrenchment usually don't just flip a switch for a royalty check.
I get that. It sounds reductive if you look at it purely as an individual character assassination. But the author is using Bolton as an avatar for a much larger systemic market reality.
Okay, walk me through that. Let's look at the mechanics of this capitalism of war as he frames it.
In 2026, the pundit class and the political commentary ecosystem are entirely driven by algorithms. And what do those algorithms reward?
Conflict, dissent, outrage, the usual stuff.
Exactly. So if you are a commentator, your viability, meaning your book deals, your speaking fees, your YouTube ad revenue.
Your entire livelihood.
Right. It all depends on generating engagement. And there is very little engagement in calmly agreeing with the current administration's war policy.
So saying everything is going according to plan doesn't get you clicks.
Never. The market demand for dissenting literature and commentary is so lucrative that it creates an overwhelming financial incentive to publicly declare the war a massive failure.
So you're saying the commentators might not even be completely abandoning their deep-seated beliefs, but the algorithm disproportionately amplifies the voices that scream failure.
Yes, which creates the illusion of a crumbling consensus.
Man. So put yourself back in the shoes of the Iranian negotiator at the Islamabad talks. You are sitting at the table.
You don't see the American algorithm operating in the background. You just see the final output.
You just see a media landscape absolutely flooded with internal dissent. High-profile Americans predicting their own defeat on every screen.
And you misinterpret that market-driven, algorithmically boosted punditry as deep structural weakness within the American government.
Consequently, you feel deeply emboldened, and you raise your demands to a maximalist level at the negotiating table.
It's a terrifying feedback loop if you think about it.
It really is. The digital tools built to capture American consumer attention to sell ads are accidentally shaping the strategic posture of foreign adversaries in real time.
It's an incredible vulnerability.
But, if the information space is so compromised, my instinct is to just bypass it entirely. If they think they are winning because of YouTube, why not just show them they are losing through traditional means?
Like military or economic force.
Yeah. Hit them with overwhelming military force or crush them with economic sanctions until they can't afford to keep fighting.
Well, the author addresses both of those traditional levers of power. And he argues that in this specific environment, both are completely useless.
Completely useless. That's a bold claim.
Let's start with military force. The fundamental flaw with military deterrence is that it entirely relies on the enemy's desire to stay alive.
Right. Game theory only works if both players are actively trying to avoid destruction.
Exactly. If I threaten you with a strike, you change your behavior because you want to survive.
But the author argues that the math of deterrence completely shatters when the adversary actively desires the destruction you are threatening them with.
He brings up the concept of martyrdom to explain this. He quotes a Hezbollah leader who once said, "We love death like you love life. How do you expect to defeat us?"
When you look at the mechanics of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the author points out that there are tens of thousands of soldiers in underground missile cities who genuinely want to die.
They don't just want to win the physical battle. They view martyrdom as the absolute pinnacle of human existence.
So if the ultimate goal of a soldier is to die in combat to achieve spiritual glory, then dropping a bomb on their bunker isn't a deterrent at all.
No, it's an accommodation. It is giving them exactly what they want.
He even points to the highest levels of the regime to prove this isn't just some brainwashing tactic for the low-level foot soldiers.
Right, he brings up the Ayatollah.
Yeah, noting that he stayed in the most visible building in Tehran, ultimately attaining martyrdom. And the author uses this incredibly dark, almost corporate phrase to describe it.
What was it?
He says, "You can't accuse the guy of not eating his own dog food."
Wow. It's a jarring way to describe religious martyrdom, but it proves the consistency of the ideology, from the bottom all the way to the top.
It really does. You cannot bomb an entity into submission when they view physical death as a spiritual victory.
Okay, so the military lever is broken. What about the economic lever?
Right. We constantly hear about sanctions as the sophisticated, modern, bloodless way to pressure a regime.
You freeze their assets, you squeeze their economy, and eventually the government collapses under the weight of its own bankruptcy.
That's the theory. But that theory assumes a separation between the military apparatus and the civilian economy.
And the author provides a staggering organizational analysis of why sanctions fail against the IRGC.
He compares them to the Pakistani military, right, noting that Munir's men control maybe 20 to 30% of the Pakistani economy.
which is already a lot for a military. But the IRGC is a completely different beast.
The analogy he uses here is just mind-bending to me. He says the IRGC is ExxonMobil, Microsoft, McDonald's, and about 100 other Fortune 500 companies all rolled into one single corporate umbrella.
Let's break down the mechanics of those specific comparisons because they matter.
Go for it.
ExxonMobil represents total control over energy, raw materials, and massive physical infrastructure.
Right.
Microsoft represents absolute dominance over technology, telecommunications, and internal data.
Okay, and McDonald's.
McDonald's represents ubiquitous ground-level retail, real estate, and the daily food supply chain. The author is stating that the IRGC doesn't just protect the Iranian economy, they are the Iranian economy.
He actually gets openly frustrated with the limitations of the English language trying to describe this.
He does. He explicitly rejects the word monopoly.
Yeah, he points out that a monopoly is when one company dominates one specific sector, like Google dominating search.
But the IRGC doesn't dominate a sector. It operates as the entire market.
He calls them a corporation pretending to be an army.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that corporate structure explains exactly why external financial penalties are practically meaningless.
Right, because traditional economic sanctions are designed to cause pain in the civilian sector, which theoretically creates unrest that pressures the government.
But if the military army owns the oil refineries, the tech infrastructure, the telecommunications networks, and the physical supply chains, they operate in a completely closed loop.
So the sanctions might devastate the average Iranian citizen who is locked out of that loop, but the IRGC can internally sustain itself indefinitely.
You simply can't sanction a self-contained ecosystem.
So we are looking at a state of complete geopolitical gridlock here.
A total stalemate.
The exiled opposition is uselessly talking to 20 people in Sweden. The regime is artificially emboldened by American YouTube algorithms.
Military strikes fail against a martyrdom complex.
And economic sanctions fail against a massive, self-sustaining corporate army. It sounds hopelessly bleak.
It really does. But this is exactly where the author pivots.
He moves away from the macro-level failures and introduces a highly specific, grassroots blueprint for victory.
He shifts the entire burden of resolution away from international bodies and foreign militaries. He places it squarely on the shoulders of the Iranian diaspora.
But not the exiled elites like Reza Pahlavi. He means the ordinary, everyday people living outside of Iran.
He lays out a very methodical roadmap for them. He says the diaspora must form an umbrella organization with a, quote, common minimum program.
I really want to pause on that phrase, common minimum program, because it sounds so simple on paper. But historically, this is where almost every diaspora movement falls apart.
It is arguably the single hardest political maneuver for an exiled population to execute.
Why is that?
Because a diaspora is naturally fractured. You have monarchists, you have secular Democrats, you have socialists, you have different ethnic and religious factions.
Right, a huge mix of ideologies.
Usually, they spend 90% of their energy arguing with each other over what a hypothetical government should look like 20 years from now.
So they fight over the future instead of fixing the present.
Exactly. A common minimum program forces them to stop debating the long-term details. It forces them to agree on the absolute baseline required to remove the current regime.
It is basically an agreement to put ideological differences on hold for the singular purpose of survival and transition.
Yes, and once they establish that baseline, he demands an interim government, an interim constitution guaranteeing human rights, and a strict 12-month roadmap to a constituent assembly.
It reads like a highly disciplined project management timeline for revolution.
It really is.
But here's where it gets really interesting. All of that structural architecture is just preparation for one specific tactical move.
The core of his entire strategy.
He writes that the diaspora needs to network inside Iran and then execute a mass directive. He says the diaspora needs to call people inside Iran en masse, make 1 million phone calls, ask people to take to the streets.
1 million phone calls.
I have to stop and really question the logistics of this. I mean, we're talking about the year 2026.
Right.
This is an era of advanced cyber warfare, autonomous drones, AI-generated propaganda, total surveillance states. The regime is operating a tech infrastructure comparable to Microsoft, like we just said.
True.
And the author's ultimate decisive weapon to bring down this Fortune 500 military conglomerate is An analog phone tree.
I know, it sounds crazy.
It feels deeply naive. Why would a million phone calls work when billions of dollars in sophisticated cyber warfare haven't made a dent?
It feels analog because it is fundamentally analog.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue it is the exact opposite of naive.
Really? How so?
It is a highly calculated, almost surgical response to the realities of a modern surveillance state.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the mechanics of trust in an authoritarian regime.
Okay, trust.
The digital public square in Iran is entirely compromised. The internet is throttled. Social media platforms are heavily monitored. Text messages can be intercepted, spoofed, or manipulated by state intelligence.
So you can't trust anything on a screen.
Exactly. If an Iranian citizen receives an anonymous mass text or sees a viral digital flyer urging them to protest at a specific intersection, their immediate logical assumption is that it is a trap.
A trap set by the secret police to identify dissidents.
Yes, in that specific environment, digital mass communication has zero trust value.
So the technology we normally rely on for mass mobilization is essentially weaponized against the population.
Precisely. But what happens when the communication isn't a digital broadcast, but a one-to-one human connection?
A literal voice ringing through the phone.
It's a cousin in Toronto, an aunt in London, a childhood friend in Los Angeles. That interaction entirely bypasses the state's digital propaganda filter.
Because even if the regime's surveillance apparatus is listening to the call, they cannot easily fake the shared history between those two people.
Exactly. They can't fake the emotional nuance, the inside jokes, the pre-existing trust between family members.
That human voice carries an emotional payload that an algorithm simply cannot replicate.
It's the ultimate anti-surveillance tool, because it leverages a network the state didn't build and fundamentally can't hack, which is human relationships.
Wow, that is a brilliant way to frame it. The author writes with absolute certainty about this too. He says, "You don't wait and hope it happens, you make it happen."
And he boils the entire outcome of the war down to a stark binary.
He says, if the people take to the streets, the regime falls. If the people don't take to the streets, the regime does not fall.
But we really cannot ignore the horrific reality of what he is demanding here.
No, we can't.
He is asking the diaspora to pick up the phone, call the people they love most in the world, and ask them to walk out their front doors into a highly lethal environment.
The author has no illusions about this. He explicitly predicts the regime's violent response. He warns that if the people take to the streets, they will immediately face Baisi goons on motorbikes showing up with machine guns.
Let's explain who the Baisi are for context, because
Okay.
it really raises the stakes of this entire blueprint.
Right, they aren't traditional soldiers deployed on a standard battlefield.
No, the Basij are a paramilitary volunteer militia operating directly under the IRGC. They are deeply embedded in local communities.
And they are specifically utilized for violent crackdowns on domestic protests.
Because they operate on motorcycles and dress in plainclothes or riot gear, they can move incredibly rapidly through urban environments.
They employ brutal, close-quarters violence to shatter demonstrations before they can even reach a critical mass.
So the author is asking a million ordinary citizens to walk unarmed into machine gun fire from a highly mobile paramilitary force.
On its own, that is a literal recipe for a massacre.
Yes, it is.
But this is where the final and definitely most controversial piece of his architecture comes into play. This is where the United States enters the picture.
But not as an invader, in a highly specific, very restrained role.
He issues a very clear directive to the U.S. military. He says, do not vacate the crime scene just yet. Stay put.
He wants the U.S. to act as an aerial overwatch.
Right. He writes that when the Basij show up on their motorbikes with machine guns to slaughter the protesters, they get taken out aerially. The U.S. is at the ready.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of tactics. He is proposing a true hybrid revolution.
Walk me through how that hybrid actually functions on the ground.
Okay, so on the ground, you have the most intimate, grassroots, analog organizing possible. Family members calling each other on the phone to coordinate street protests.
Relying entirely on raw human courage.
Exactly. But in the sky above them, you have the most advanced, lethal, technological military umbrella in human history, piloted by a foreign superpower.
He's trying to thread an impossibly narrow needle. He doesn't want the U.S. to invade, to occupy, or to dictate the new government at all.
He is asking the U.S. military to fundamentally change its posture from a strategic combatant to a protective shield.
He essentially wants the U.S. to be the bouncer for an Iranian domestic democratic uprising.
It's a fascinating concept, the superpower serving exclusively as an umbrella for the grassroots.
But, you know, What if it fails?
That's the big question.
What if the diaspora can't agree on a common minimum program? What if they just don't make the million phone calls? What if Reza just keeps doing the European think tank circuit forever?
The author outlines the alternative, and it is just dripping with cynical exhaustion.
If the grassroots mobilization fails, he argues the best realistic outcome the world can hope for is a full ceasefire.
He notes that a full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical global shipping lane, would be, quote, an excellent development for this juncture.
But he immediately qualifies it by saying, but this is no resolution.
And his final thought on that scenario is just devastatingly dry.
I actually laughed out loud reading it, despite how dark the subject matter is. He writes, otherwise, while the strait is open, that is all one can be thankful for. To which some say, but the strait was already open before the war started.
That perfectly encapsulates the cyclical, bloody absurdity of modern conflict.
Think about the staggering cost, the massive loss of human life, the widespread economic devastation, the profound geopolitical tension that ripples across the entire globe.
All of that horrific violence and suffering, just to eventually sit at a table in Islamabad, sign a piece of paper, and return to the exact same baseline status quo you had before the very first shot was fired.
The strait was open, the war happened, the strait is open again. It's a closed, utterly futile loop.
It highlights exactly why he is so desperately pushing for the grassroots revolution.
Right. Without structural change driven by the people on the ground, the international community is just endlessly managing the symptoms of a disease they refuse to actually cure.
So to fully grasp the sheer density of this blueprint, this wild combination of grassroots neighborhood activism, deep critiques of algorithmic capitalism, theological analysis of martyrdom.
And massive corporate analogies.
Yeah, all of it. To grasp that, you really have to look at the mind of the architect.
You have to look at Paramendra Kumar Bhagat's broader body of work. Because this blog post, fucking Reza, it does not exist in a vacuum.
It is one highly localized pressure point within a massive, overarching intellectual ecosystem.
So, what does this all mean? When you look at the sidebar of his blog, the sheer volume of output is staggering.
He has nearly 5 million page views. He has been blogging continuously since 2004.
And the bibliography of books he has authored is incredibly diverse. Let's examine some of these titles because they inform exactly how he arrived at his theories on the war.
First, you have a deep, almost obsessive focus on the future of technology.
He has books titled Agentic AI, Set to Explode in 2026, Liquid Computing, and The Convergence Age.
The focus on agentic AI is particularly revealing here. Let's explain what that implies.
Sure.
Traditional AI, like the early chatbots we all used, simply answered prompts. Agentic AI refers to artificial intelligence that possesses actual agency.
Meaning it can understand a high-level goal, autonomously break it down into steps, and interact with other software to execute that goal without any human intervention.
Exactly. So when a mind steeped in the mechanics of agentic AI and liquid computing looks at the war in Iran, he doesn't just see soldiers and politicians.
He sees systems.
He sees the YouTube propaganda loop not as a random occurrence, but as an automated system of algorithmic reward that is actively shaping human perception and enemy morale.
He deeply understands how non-human systems dictate human outcomes.
Yes, but what makes his worldview so totally unique is that right next to the hardcore predictive technology books, you find titles deeply rooted in spiritual and prophetic frameworks.
It's true. He wrote Kalkiism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance. Prophecies are proof of God and the last age of war.
It's a fascinating duality, the hyper-technological blended with the intensely spiritual.
And that duality directly informs his analysis of the IRGC. When he discusses their martyrdom complex, the idea that they desire death over life, he isn't dismissing it as mere fanaticism.
No, and he isn't looking at it just as the logistical military hurdle either. He's looking at it through a deep spiritual and philosophical framework.
Because he operates within a deeply spiritual framework himself, he fully understands the terrifying, immovable power of a theological worldview on the battlefield. He knows you simply cannot defeat a spiritual conviction with a purely material weapon, like a missile or a bank sanction.
And then, layering on top of the tech and the theology, you have his fiction. Novels like The Country of Geniuses and Trump's Default.
Writing geopolitical fiction requires a mind that is constantly running simulations. He's taking variables like global empires, technological shifts, volatile political figures.
Like Donald Trump.
Right, and modeling alternative futures to see exactly how the systems break down or evolve.
When you synthesize all of this, the deep understanding of AI systems, the spiritual blueprints, the geopolitical simulations, and his real-world foundation as a grassroots political volunteer for Obama in New York City,
You get a very clear understanding of the argument in this blog post.
you realize that fucking Reza isn't just an angry, off-the-cuff rant typed out in a brief moment of frustration.
It is the highly specific, localized application of an incredibly complex, meticulously developed worldview. He is taking everything he knows about technology, theology, and street-level organizing and projecting all of it onto this single, incredibly volatile conflict.
But there is a profound, almost tragic irony in the presentation of it all.
Oh, definitely. This is a man who wrote a book titled Verbal Martial Arts and Non-Reaction.
He literally wrote the book on maintaining emotional discipline, utilizing non-reaction as a tool, and managing social concentric circles.
And yet, he titled this specific post with raw, unfiltered, profane frustration, fucking Reza.
It highlights a genuine breaking point for him.
Exactly. It underscores how deeply personal and incredibly urgent this specific situation feels to him. The situation in Iran, the wasted potential of the diaspora, the corporate machinery of the regime, the cyclical absurdity of the war.
It is all so egregious that the theorist of non-reaction felt absolutely compelled to react with extreme linguistic force.
He is watching the CEO pitch the book club while the company burns to the ground, and he simply can't stay silent.
Which serves as an incredible reminder for you, the listener, about the sheer value of engaging with primary sources.
It really does. We live in a world saturated with highly polished news articles, sanitized think tank summaries, and sterile government press releases.
But there is an immense, irreplaceable value in diving into deeply opinionated, heavily personalized blogs like this one.
This is how real, complex, highly educated, and deeply frustrated people attempt to synthesize the chaos of global events.
You don't have to agree with Paramendra Kumar Bhagat's political stances or his military strategies to be profoundly challenged by his analytical framework.
Looking closely at his arguments forces you to see the hidden fractures in our global systems that you would otherwise completely miss.
I couldn't agree more.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, building on the mechanisms we've explored today.
A lot to think about.
The author makes a compelling case that American YouTube algorithms and the capitalist drive for book sales might literally be giving foreign adversaries the confidence to escalate a war.
Unintentionally, but effectively.
Right. So if the digital tools that we originally built to connect with friends, share videos, and entertain ourselves are now actively shaping the morale and the tactical demands of foreign armies in real time, are we entirely rethinking what the front line of a war actually looks like?
That's a chilling thought.
Has the front line moved permanently from the physical trenches to the recommended feed? And in a future world increasingly driven by autonomous agentic AI, global surveillance, and algorithmic media,
Yeah.
is it possible that the most radical, disruptive act of rebellion left to humanity is simply picking up an analog phone, dialing a number, and talking to a single human being?
Definitely something to think about the next time your phone rings.